Yeah. Well, this is Faith Over Breakfast with Andy Littleton and Eric Siepen. Andy's across from me, and he's pastor of Mission Church. And I'm Eric, and I'm pastor of the Village Church. And we just talked about Kobe Bryant. Halfway through, as usual, we just kind of made a shift into something a little deeper.
Yeah.
And
so we, not that Kobe isn't a deep topic.
No.
It was, and yeah, and I think that we know people who were impacted by his death, but yeah, there was I think it was a really rich direction we ended up going and reflecting on death and grief. And so who should listen to this? If you are just interested in Kobe Bryant, and if you're a little uncomfortable with death and grief, stay with it.
Yeah, and just for those of you who are not basketball fans and may not even know who Kobe Bryant is, he is an NBA basketball player who is considered to be in the top 5 greatest players to have ever played.
And just died at age 41.
Yes.
And so, yeah, thanks for tuning in. As always, we really welcome reviews out there and on the platforms we're on, especially Apple Music, where a lot of the others feed from. So if you're so inclined, we'd really appreciate it. If you have questions, send them to faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com and enjoy.
Yeah, thank you. Check.
Check.
Yeah, we look good enough.
Check. There, I like that.
You like that volume?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast.
Hey, Eric, good to see you, man.
It's good to see you. Seems like we're both kind of in a...
Yeah, we're not in our chipper go get 'em moods today, are we?
No.
Which is okay, because we're going to talk about the death of Kobe Bryant, and I mean, that's not a chipper thing to talk about.
No,
so,
it's not.
You didn't wear Lakers colors on purpose, though, did you?
No, I did not.
Okay, it just happened.
I could never be caught wearing Lakers colors.
Yeah. You were just telling me, and this is not to. But you weren't like a fan of Kobe.
No.
Yourself. Okay. Yeah.
No. I thought he was a ball hog.
You thought he was a ball hog. Okay. Yeah. I honestly didn't. I think I was really paying attention to basketball just before Kobe became as big as he was, and so.
Right.
Yeah, I was kind of in a tuned out from sports phase when he was huge. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't have these great memories of watching Kobe, but obviously one of the better basketball players ever.
Yeah. Well, there's interesting things that happened, like LeBron James passed his scoring.
Yeah, just last
numbers,
week, right?
That last week. I don't know. The only reason I wanted to talk about it is I just thought it's interesting to see, and not interesting, to be part of our culture that is mourning a figure that we all know and had some connection to. I mean, we know who he is. None of us know him.
Right.
We can only reflect on what he's offered us.
Right.
But it was the effect that it had on some of the people at my church, and the effect that you definitely saw on his like friends who played basketball was definitely right there. Like, people were crying on set, and you could see they were definitely shaken up.
Yeah, in celebrity world, right? Because there was at the Staples Center. Which awards were those that were going on? I'm not.
Grammys?
Probably.
Were the Grammys going on?
Yeah.
I think it was the Grammys.
But yeah, they were in the stadium where he played, right? And that seemed to be, there was a lot going on there. I mean, the prayer before the impeachment hearing referenced his death and life, and the hip hop community that I kind of, that's one of the groups that pops up on my feeds, right? They were pretty shocked, and were a lot of memories of Kobe. I actually heard about it. I was over at Crave Coffee, which a lot of people from your church frequent as well.
Yeah.
And there were actually some dudes who I would guess are athletes. They were all kind of in jerseys of a similar city, and it seemed like athletes from out of town potentially. Okay. So there were like 4 of them sitting up at the bar, and so I heard about this because I was sitting there looking over my sermon or just about to start, and one of the guys just said, hey, did you guys see this? Kobe Bryant just died in a helicopter accident. And it had broken like 2 minutes ago or something. And they all started, hunting for articles and trying to get info, and they were talking about it throughout the morning, just while I was sitting there. So that's how I found out. You found out after church.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm trying to think, at our church personally, a couple people said, did you hear about Kobe Bryant? But I didn't. There wasn't like a lot of, we were in the evening at this point where people had kind of already digested that information if they were deeply affected by it, I guess. But for you observed people right at your church right when they got the news.
Yeah, and I think they were just hit pretty hard. And I think what hit me even harder later is just that his daughter was on that plane, absolutely. And another family and their kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that team loses, family members and basketball players that they are close to. That's pretty devastating. Yeah. Just suddenly, the suddenness of it, one day everybody's talking about somebody and the next day they're gone.
Right.
Is just a.
Oh yeah. Every life was obviously a tragic loss, but I did feel an extra level of impact when I found out that children were there too. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think just the horrificness of that, imagining going down in a helicopter crash with your kids.
Oh my gosh.
Knowing this is the end. Like there's a lot there that's just like, wow.
And I have a daughter, just a little younger. And that thought of that moment. And I can, in my mind, like imagine what I as a dad might do you're scared, but like potentially like, wanting to like hold your child in that moment or something. I don't know how all that would possibly work.
Don't
but
even know how any of that
just
goes.
Depending on how it all exactly happened. But yeah. Just thinking about that sort of stuff is really sobering.
Yeah, and I it makes me think about, do we know how to handle death very well? Like what does it look like to embrace what is a reality that we aren't going to live forever, at least in this particular stage.
Why is it? I think one thing I get a little uncomfortable with sometimes is like when the celebrity dies, we all are so, we're so affected, and then like grappling with the fact that like so many other people died on the same day. And I understand it. I'm just, there's just a slight discomfort that happens in me over like, do we value certain lives a lot more? They all should be valued. These people should absolutely be mourned. But it's just a little thing that I
think some of it is that celebrities in particular are gods for us, or demigods. So when they die, it's sort of their power in our life is taken away. But I also think some of them serve as leaders in our life.
Of course.
And we don't have any personal relationship with them. So Kobe Bryant hasn't said an offensive word to me or ever hurt me, but he may have led, like I was kind of, impacted a little bit about maybe what his stories are like, that, they were talking about how on Sunday he was at church, like that he's a practicing Catholic and that he takes his faith seriously. And there's been a transformation of some sort over the years in how he understands things. Well, that's something that's meaningful. Okay. So it's inspiring.
Right.
And I think that's part of it. You lose, all of a sudden your inspiration is taken from you. You kind of hope that you can be like that person. Right. If you work hard. Colby was about working hard. That's what everybody talks about, his work ethic in everything that he did. So, there's sort of that, if I work hard, I can be like Colby. So there's some of that that's taken away, I think. They inspire us. People who inspire us when they're taken away,
And we're inspired by people who are good at things.
Yes. We are inspired by people who are good at things. Wow.
Oddly, when we aren't necessarily good at those things, and like, we can't do it.
Yeah, and I'll never be able to jump above the rim like he did.
Right.
If he were to have gotten to 80, he could probably jump higher than I can now.
You're right. Yeah. True.
So those are the I'm not going to accomplish.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's an interesting, especially in light of, so we talked about Ricky Gervais recently and how he ripped into celebrities and nobody cares what you think. And then a celebrity dies and we go into a state of national mourning. So do we? Like, was Ricky right that nobody cares?
I think he was
what
wrong.
They think? Yeah.
I think there's so many voices that sometimes we don't care about what a lot of them have to think, but there are particular ones that we do care. I mean, every single late night show had a 3-minute tribute to him.
Yeah, I know. Right. Of course.
You just said that.
I mean, the fact that it was part of the impeachment
prayer. Yeah. Wow. So I think there's a longing for us to be more and to have something more. Yeah. And these people seem like they may have it.
Yeah.
And so we try to be
what is that more that we're thinking they have, you think? I mean,
well, I think obviously we live in such a broken and fallen world that everything feels very empty.
Right.
And because I don't know the emptiness of Kobe Bryant, he doesn't sit down and talk about the damage that he did in his relationship with his wife and things, if you know his history and what happened and how that marriage was restored and how his own loneliness. I don't know anything about that. I just know his accolades and his things that he teaches and the things that he practices.
He probably talked about these things with some people, but not us.
Right, with not the major population.
Yeah,
right. Those of us who worship him at some level or follow him. So he seems like he has something that I don't, that I could maybe be filled up with. And if I succeed like him, I won't be as lonely and I'll have some good things in life.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think they're kind of demi saviors. They're sort of mini Jesuses that aren't really Jesus.
And then interestingly, though, I think a lot of these people that came out in mourning, outside of LeBron surpassing his record recently, I think a lot of people weren't really, Kobe wasn't on their minds until he died.
Right.
Because he's retired. And he was doing, obviously youth basketball things and other, I'm sure he had a lot going on.
Sure.
But he was retired from the thing that put him in the spotlight.
Right.
He was back to doing what other people do. He just had this past, this story and sports cards and videos of him scoring 50 points and, things like that. And so it's an interesting thing to become devastated by somebody you haven't been thinking about at all. I think when I saw it, I was like, oh, what happened? And I was saddened because anytime you hear about a death, event. I think it was probably about equivalent to if I'd seen on the news that there was a rollover accident and 2 people died and who I didn't know.
Right.
It was similar, but just a little heightened because I was like, oh, I remember, I know kind of who that is. But I think if I saw in the news that there was a rollover accident and somebody from my church 5 years ago was in it, I would have felt maybe the same.
Right.
But yeah, it was interesting to see the amount of grief poured out for somebody that I think generally hasn't been on people's minds. And it's an interesting phenomenon. I think it's, to some degree, it's appropriate. If you really did make a big deal of this person in your life and they die, you should care.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It just strikes me. This isn't the first time. It's every time somebody really well known has died. And I just wonder, I guess, I go, why is it so much more tragic in our minds, even though we're not talking to this person, really thinking about this person? When big people who've done big things die, we consider that very, very tragic. But when a 3-year-old child dies. It's also tragic, but not on nearly the same scale as because nobody knew who they were. I guess I get it. It's just something
You're just working it out.
I'm working it out right here with you over your coffee.
Over my coffee. I didn't even make you a coffee.
You didn't even
today.
make me coffee. Thanks for that.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so say like somebody came to you at church, since we're pastors, and they said, "Man, with the death of Kobe Bryant, I'm just really I'm really down. I'm really struggling."
That's a hard one. I don't want to laugh because I'm just pretty sure. I mean, I could see somebody saying, "Wow, this death has really hit me, and it's made me rethink some things."
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering about life and what's going on.
I mean, that's what the prayer at the impeachment hearing was like. Remind us of life and its brevity, as if like in the prayer it was kind of like so that we'll behave differently here in this impeachment hearing.
Right.
We say those things.
Yeah.
But then do we really sit down and go, I'm going to think about this impeachment completely differently now because life is so short, and what does my life mean? And
right.
I don't know.
I think the reason I wanted to talk about it, maybe not in the context of like Kobe Bryant and his impact on my congregation, though that existed, but I think we don't talk about death enough. And before this, I had read an article kind of outlining, just the different ways the African American community and the Hispanic community mourn, and then how white people mourn, and just how disconnected from death we are.
Yeah, I
would say that that's in our American culture, and then I would say that is also kind of integrated into the different ethnic groups too, is that we've become more and more as a society disconnected from death. Right. Though I would say communities that are more acquainted with it tend to be more engaged with it.
Yeah, in Tucson, where we are here, our Hispanic community, if somebody dies in an accident, there's going to be
a cross with flowers.
And maybe a whole like a Virgin Mary statue, a Virgin of Guadalupe, a memorial of some form set up for that person that is maintained sometimes for a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think like it struck me is that I think the Anglo community mourns by demanding justice. Even when we look at death, we ask why.
Yeah.
Why did this happen? This should have never happened.
And we put money into a fund to cure this disease.
Let's cure this disease, or this person needs to pay for their recklessness, or this. There's that kind of thing. We kind of mourn out of anger, and we don't.
And we take action.
Yeah. And I think that's sad to me because we don't connect to and remember and sort of come together and much and really try to grapple with things, and I think some of that is there isn't the faith narrative is gone in a lot of ways in contemporary society, where like in the Hispanic community there's a strong Catholic narrative. Right. The African American community, there's a strong kind of gospel,
when something like this happens, like everybody goes back to church. Like when there's a tragedy, it's like even if you've strayed for years, like
you're gonna
when this bad thing happens, you go back to church or you gather in front of the Staples Center for what is in a way a funeral, a pre-funeral of some form.
Yeah. It's a big deal. So I guess I'm just pondering that, just pondering what it is that, prevents us from talking about it. I think because we ask why so much, and because I think as a society we've become more and more atheistic or secular, that we don't like the answer that gives us. That death is just final and there's nothing and it just doesn't matter, and your life really doesn't matter. You're just kind of here, in a hedonistic way, and you're only being kind just to make things work.
Right.
But so the answers are just empty.
Yeah. And we don't live out of them really.
And so we get angry.
And even like to be moved to action is a weird way of saying like the life matters because of what we do.
Yes.
With it. It's not just because they intrinsically mattered themselves to where we just grieve and weep, but it matters, because it inspires us to make things better. That's like how we have now framed the value of that life.
Right. Yeah, and it's really kind of selfish. Like, I'm using this person's death, like you said, to start the fund.
Right.
So that we can prolong life a little bit longer for the next person, and they can live a little bit longer.
And then my sister's life had meaning.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whereas I think, the gospel narrative is kind of transformative. And if Kobe Bryant, did make a shift after things were exposed in his life, and it seems when you look from the outside that he really engaged with his wife and his children at that point. There's
a lot of beautiful pictures of them together.
Right.
And
you don't know anything about it, but let's just theoretically say that happened and he re-engaged his Catholic faith. There is, for him, as he steps into the kingdom of God and an engagement with Jesus, that something's gorgeous and beautiful. His life hasn't ended. It's actually become much greater to the point where he, I would think, I know he would consider all his accolades to be, as Paul would say, dung, like worthless, just to know Christ and somehow attain the resurrection, right? And I think, wow, that's like something to celebrate. It's very beautiful. It's something to sit in for a while and contemplate. So there's that element that I think is so missing from even, my own thinking a lot of times.
Right. So. Yeah, we tend to, the way that we frame death and the way that death is framed in the Bible. My daughter Abby was asking about, the helicopter crash, and she's like, who found, Kobe Bryant? And she didn't grow up. She doesn't really know who he is.
Right.
And I said, probably it was really bad, sweetie. Like, it's not like somebody found him. Right. There was an explosion and a fire. And, and she was like, oh, was there blood everywhere? I was like, well, there was an explosion and a fire. Like, I don't even know.
Right.
What that was like. And, So we tend to think like that's just like we don't want to think about that stuff. She was thinking about it, and you feel kind of weird when you start to think about it, and then you're like, oh, I'm talking about body parts, and I need to like this is weird, and I got to stop thinking about this. And death is just like it's like this scary, terrible thing where we can't imagine ourselves dead and dismembered.
Right.
And then when you think about like you're saying, let's say Kobe knows Jesus, and you said it's possible, and even like the idea in the end of the end of all things is this fire,
right?
And that those who belong to God pass through it, and that's their purification. It's where they come out more beautiful on the other side, like. Something like this kind of event, actually takes on a whole new meaning when in a flash, in a fire, your life ends and you enter into an eternal state. You're made new. And it's not like this, thing that's like, oh, I can't talk about the fire and I can't talk about the death. If it has meaning like that, like
sure,
but it's hard to connect those realities. It feels it's I think like you said, in our culture it feels like just this final thing that means the life is just meaningless and over. But then we can't live like that. But we also can't grapple with the realities of what just happened. We don't want to talk about it.
Right.
We show all these videos of him dunking on somebody.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting to me, because I've been starting to think that, like, just to use this whole basketball analogy, in basketball you practice a lot more than you play games.
Right.
Well, you're practicing so that you have all this, muscle memory
Right.
when you play the game. And I think faith is like that we are called to have some regular morning in our life so that when morning comes, we know how.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that we don't have a lot in our faith space where we're like, oh, someone died in our church. It's a month of mourning now.
Yeah.
It's kind of, someone was talking about Downton Abbey, and I actually have never watched the whole show. I watched a few of them, and I'm like, oh, I can't do this. But she was talking about how they all have to wear black, and then they were saying, oh, and then next month we'll be able to wear half black.
Right. Right.
Because they're in mourning about something that happened.
Right.
We don't have anything symbolic. Like when someone passes away in our community, say at Mission or at Village, we don't say, okay, for a month, we're all, when we come to church or when we interact with each other, we're all going to wear this thing, or we're all going to be in this place where when we see each other, it's like, yeah, we lost so-and-so. Like we're aware of the loss, and we're aware of the place that we live.
Yeah.
We have our funeral. There are little bits and pieces, but it's not necessarily part of our culture. And I think part of it's that I don't mourn as a regular rhythm in my life.
Yeah, we don't know how to mourn, and we're scared of it. And
it's terrifying.
I had a discussion recently about my book and my dad, where somebody was asking about the book, and I started off with it being a travel memoir, but then I quickly got into my dad's death, and they started, you could tell they had a similar experience, and they cut me off kindly, but said, I can't talk about this anymore, and walked away. And I'm
wow.
like, because it was bringing up stuff,
sure.
And I would have loved to have sat with them in their pain, because I've felt it, but they weren't ready for that, or they didn't know how to do that, or something. Like the muscle memory wasn't there. And I thought, even today, I'm wearing my dad's socks right now.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and I always liked, he had these Nike socks that he never wore, but I think he knew they were nice socks, so they were just always in his drawer. And after his death, it took me a little bit. My mom and I kind of left his stuff there in the closet for, I don't know, a month or so. Right. And then we kind of started to, okay, maybe we need to box some of this up. And I kept some things. I kept a pair of his boots that fit me. I kept these Nike socks. I kept a few T-shirts. I kept some flannels. And I was just talking to another guy recently who just lost his dad, and they had, a really strong sense that he was with Jesus. And they were talking about his same brand of flannels as my dad, the Pendletons, and his hats. I have some of my dad's hats and some of his boots, and how they divvied them all up among the children, and how they're all wearing his clothes. And I'm like I said, I'm wearing my dad's socks now, and I was wearing one of his flannels earlier in the week, and every time I put it on, I think of him, and it's not wearing black, but at first it was hard, and it felt weird, and it felt sad, and now it's kind of transitioned to being, I think, kind of an honor and a cool thing to wear his clothes until they wear out, Yeah,
no, that makes sense.
But I was just thinking how, like, some of us can't even talk about the loss of a person.
Right.
And there's all sorts of rituals. Some people, it's a gathering at the Staples Center. For others, apparently, it's wearing their clothes.
Right.
But yeah, those are like practices that certain communities, and I realized this guy I was talking to, our dads were both kind of in the working class, and the type who had a Pendleton dress flannel. Right. Like I think we were living out of a practice that a community's built that we didn't even realize was there. Right. Which is if you buy Red Wing boots and a Pendleton shirt, those are very valuable things. And you want to pass them down, and those are ways you remember one another and stuff like that.
Very interesting.
But yeah, anyway, it seems like habits and practices that are built in help us.
They do.
Learn how to grieve. Yeah.
Which is why I become, as I've gotten older, to a place where I really believe in a certain form of liturgy on Sunday. Yeah. It doesn't have to be traced back to the ancients,
right,
but an explained liturgy that has some way of practice that helps us remember, helps us practice certain things. I think having some parts of the calendar present, the church calendar, so that when I hit Lent, I'm actually lamenting my own sin. I'm lamenting and mourning that Jesus had to die.
Yeah.
Like that's like actually slowing myself down so that I'm not caught up in this may sound strange, caught up in like Easter and the effects of Easter.
Right.
That I can put myself back.
Well, because the church in the West has tried to always live out of the two happy holy days, right? Christmas and Easter, the coming and the resurrection. Those are the big ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think those are good things. And maybe just encouraging people to live a little bit longer in mourning.
Yeah.
And really get in touch with loss before they step forward might actually be healing to their bodies and to the people and to the community. So, yeah. Well,
maybe that's our conversation right there.
That's our conversation.
Well, thanks for talking, and good to see you.